Now, if there was ever an uncomplicated decision for American Jews, it was the question of whether or not we should participate in World War II. There were about 4,800,000 and some thousand Jews in America around 1940. About 550,000 of them served in some way in the armed forces. Now, deducting for children and women who couldn't serve, this means that somewhere between a quarter and a third of all eligible males served in the military. Now, that's a very commendable record, and it is approximately the same kind of record for all American males. In other words, we have become American enough that we participated in the military just like anybody else in America. About 11,000 Jews died during the war, including 7,000 in combat. Over 26,000 men and women received decorations for valor and for merit. 6 of them received the Medal of Honor. And Rabbi Alexander Good was memorialized even on a postage stamp. Rabbi Good was one of 4 chaplains of different faiths who were headed toward Europe on a troop ship called the Dorchester. The Dorchester was torpedoed in the middle of the Atlantic, and the chaplains decided that they would give their life preserver jackets to others and go down with the ship. They voluntarily drowned to save other people, and they are legitimate heroes in American life. None of this should come as a surprise to us. First of all, for all of its faults, all the immigration restrictions that we've talked about in previous lectures, for all the anti-Semitism that still existed in America, America was still a golden land for Jews. It was a place that had no equal anywhere on the face of the earth. Compared to their European homes, the places that they had left, especially in the eastern part of Europe, America offered them economic, political, religious, social freedoms that they had never experienced before. And so by comparison, America was really the Golden Medina, the golden land. To be sure, when they first arrived, they had to settle in crowded slums, often on the Lower East Side of New York. But as soon as they were able, they moved either to Brooklyn and then out to Long Island, or north to the Bronx, eventually into Westchester. They found better accommodation, they found better jobs, they moved up in the social ladder rather quickly. America was like no other nation. It offered them an unlimited chance for upward mobility and a chance for success. And for this, Jews who lived in America in 1940 were enormously grateful. Yes, the country was imperfect, and Jews who read from the prophets knew that there was always a chance for improvement, and they strived for that improvement. But they were also grateful. Perhaps equally important or more, World War II presented them with an unalloyed opportunity to fight for the good against the evil. The two sides were so clearly demarcated by their ethical and moral values that Jews had no trouble choosing which side to ally themselves with. The contrast is especially meaningful for Jews, who often still had relatives in Europe, in areas where the fighting was occurring, and they worried intensely about whether their relatives were being treated well, or put in concentration camps, or eventually, after about 1943, when it became known that the Germans were killing people in death factories if their relatives survived at all. This was an opportunity to don the American white hat, to be the mythic savior cowboy, and to be on the right side of history in a world cataclysmic conflict. And Jews made the case. Now, at the end of the war, when the camps had been liberated and the survivors emerged from their hiding places, the question arose what to do with the massive problem of people who were homeless, who were ill, who were emaciated, who were traumatized, who could not fend for themselves because they had been so mistreated in the last several years. The problem of the inmates and displaced persons became apparent. They posed immediate problems, of course, for physical health. When 60,000 people were liberated from the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, 10,000 of them died within the first several weeks because they simply were so far beaten down and so ill that there was nothing that the Allies could do to save them. Issues of nutrition, issues of housing, where to put them, safety, these problems followed soon thereafter. And since their home communities had been destroyed, it was almost impossible for them to go home. Much of their property had been preempted by others, non-Jews in the community. And so in one small Polish community, Kielce, Jews tried to go home, and Polish Christians who had taken over their houses and their fields and their barns attacked them because they thought they were going to come back and take over their property again. You couldn't go home. So where do you go? What do you do? And so issues of resettlement were huge. Issues of family reunification were major. It was a problem to find where, if any, relatives survived. And of course, the issue of mental health continued for virtually their entire lives. If you go through something like the Nazi concentration camps, it's hard to believe that you will ever be able to escape the shadow of that terrible trauma. Now, the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, which you ought to visit, estimates that virtually all of the refugee Jews who came needed care after World War II. There was an illegal immigration operation called WWII, which was run by the Palestinian Zionists. And they were able to find ways to smuggle a number of immigrants into Palestine right after the war in 1946 and 1947. Some were able to sneak by the British blockade, but the British didn't want to upset the ethnic balance of the population in Palestine. They didn't want to alienate the Arabs, so they tried very hard to limit and to forbid immigration of these refugees. Some of them were caught and put in detention camps in Cyprus. Many of you will remember the story of the Exodus, a ship that was full of immigrants that was stopped on the coast of Palestine, and most of them were transferred to Cyprus. A few swam ashore, but they were held until Israel got its independence in 1948, and then Israel opened the gates of immigration for any Jew who needed to come there. Various Jewish agencies were able to help thousands of others locate their family members, and receptive communities all over the world opened their doors for refugees. They took them in, they resettled them, they cared for them, they tried to help them restart their lives with appropriate help. Most of these displaced persons were able eventually to deal with the trauma of the war and with the Holocaust and construct positive and creative lives in the coming decades in new locales. Some, of course, could never find peace, so massive was the psychic assault on their lives and their minds and their spirits. And it's understandable that some people just crumbled under the weight of this burden, but most did not. Now, in 1945, President Harry Truman issued an executive directive immediately admitting 16,000 Holocaust survivors to the United States. By 1952, this number had risen to about 96,000. In some instances, like on the Upper West Side of New York, they clustered together for mutual support. Others scattered across the country with the help of agencies like the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIAS. There were Jewish philanthropies, synagogues, and especially individuals who devoted financial resources and volunteer time to help these folks begin new lives. Receiving such a large influx with the kind of severe needs that they had, especially when the troops themselves, Jewish boys, were coming home, and they needed help too. This taxed Jewish resources. But as problematic as the resettlement efforts were to prove, these were nonetheless Jewish brothers and sisters, cousins, aunts, uncles, and grandchildren, and they needed help, and they got help. Now, it's estimated that there were about 140,000 survivors of the Holocaust, Jewish survivors. They made new lives with remarkable determination and strength. Most of all, if they were capable, they had children. They wanted to demonstrate in every way possible, and certainly in a symbolic way, that Hitler did not get a victory and that Jewish communities and lives would survive. And so to bring a new Jewish person into the world was a statement of resistance that was paramount. They affirmed their Jewish identity rather than deny it in almost all cases. Now, I want to tell you a couple of stories of some of my colleagues who were able to survive. Let me start with a simple one, the story of Isaac Neumann. Isaac Neumann was a rabbinical student in Berlin before the war. He went through 6 different concentration camps. It's not at all clear how he survived. He was a very small man. I knew him. and he somehow found the strength to make it. There is a story that is told that he somehow managed to finagle a job as gardener for the officers in one camp, and that he somehow could find a carrot or a leaf of lettuce to eat in addition to his regular rations. That's maybe apocryphal. We don't know. Neumann came to the United States as a displaced person in 1946, and he eventually enrolled in the University of Cincinnati, got his bachelor's degree, and then went to the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati and was ordained as a rabbi in 1960. Neumann served several congregations in South America and then came back to the United States and ended up in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. He served a long time there, and then when he retired, the Berlin Wall came down, and he was asked to go and start a Jewish congregation in what had formerly been communist East Berlin. He did. Unfortunately, he found that it was just too difficult emotionally, and he came back to the United States and eventually passed away. Here's a man who had every reason to fold under pressure, and instead devoted his life to the service of the Jewish people. My favorite story of all is the story of Rabbi Joseph Schwartz. Schwartz without a T. He was married in 1938 in Berlin as a young rabbi, and he and his bride were counseled by Rabbi Leo Beck, the chief rabbi of liberal Jews in Germany, that they should get out. They couldn't go to France, they couldn't go to Poland, they couldn't go to England, so they went south through Switzerland to Trieste, and they got on a ship. And the ship went through the Mediterranean, Suez Canal, across the Indian Ocean, and eventually ended up in Manila in the Philippines. They got off. And the Jewish community of the Philippines asked them to be their rabbis and rebbitzins, the wife of the rabbi. They did. Then the Japanese conquered the Philippines. And with chutzpah that you can only explain as a miracle. Chutzpah is nerve, attitude, daring. Schwartz went to the Japanese military governor and said, I am a citizen of your ally. Here's my German passport. You can trust me. Leave the Jews of the Philippines alone. We will take care of our own needs. We will not bother you. We will be very quiet, and we will not be a problem. And so for the entire Japanese occupation, Rabbi Schwartz took care of the synagogue and the Jewish community. They had services, they ran educational programs, they served food, they had a dispensary and a clinic for health care. They took care of everything that they could. They kept their word. Except the basement of the synagogue served as a safe house for Philippine resistance leaders who would come in occasionally to the city from the mountains or the jungle and do something to encourage resistance. They were never caught. Had they been caught, they would have all been shot immediately. But they weren't. After the war, Rabbi Schwartz remained in the Philippines because there had been about 20,000 Jews in Shanghai, in China, and they were coming out and they went to the Philippines. Rabbi Schwartz and his associates organized the dispersal of these refugees to various places, whether Israel or other countries, places where they had family, and so on. And so he spent a lot of time helping move refugees around. But something else happened in 1947. The United Nations was meeting in Lake Success, New York, and one of the items on the agenda was the creation of the State of Israel. There was a vote, and Rabbi Schwartz contacted his friend Ramon Magsaysay, who was then the foreign minister of the Philippines, the new country, the Philippines, and said, I think it's time for payback. We need you to vote for the State of Israel. And it was the vote of the Philippines that put the State of Israel over the top. There were a lot more votes. The United States came later because it was later in the alphabet, but it was a very significant move. Schwartz ended up his career in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and I had the honor of knowing him because his son was a member of my congregation in Madison, Wisconsin. And that's an example of the kind of drive, determination, and positive influence, positive difference that these people made in the world around them. They were really quite remarkable people. Now, one of the things that happened after the war was that Zionism and Israel became a much more important thing. After all, had the State of Israel existed before the war, perhaps 1 million or 2 million Jews might have been saved. We'll concentrate right now on the years immediately following the war. But it is worthwhile to point out that there are a variety of kinds of Zionism even today. One kind is called religious Zionism. The concept of a return to Zion began with the biblical prophet Jeremiah. The Jews had been exiled, 90% of them, from their homeland by Babylonians in the year 587 before the Common Era, and they were taken about 800 miles farther east. They despaired. If you read in Psalm 137, by the waters of Babylon, we sat down and wept as we remembered Zion. They wanted to go home. And the prophet Jeremiah wrote them a letter from Jerusalem, and he said, settle down, be patient. God will return you in due course to the land of Zion. Hope for that. And Jews, ever since Jeremiah, have prayed in their daily prayers for a return to Zion. It remained the poetic and philosophical expression of this longing until modern times. As a response to Tsarist oppression, however, beginning in about 1882, there came a second time, political Zionism. Political Zionism was an effort to persuade the nations of the world actively to create a homeland for Jews, a Jewish state in Palestine. In America, a pro-Zionist organization called the Zionist Organization of America was established in 1897. A women's group called Hadassah was formed shortly thereafter. In 1917, during the middle of World War I, the British Colonial Secretary, Arthur James Lord Balfour, issued a declaration on behalf of His Majesty's government. He said that they viewed with favor the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Why did they do that? They did it because there was a chemist named Chaim Weizmann who lived in England. He was a refugee from Central Europe, came to England, and he had invented a much more potent kind of naval gunpowder. So the British Navy could stand off farther from the German ships and fire at them and get their shells to hit them when the Germans couldn't bridge the difference. They didn't have the same kind of power. And this was a way to win the war. So the British government said this document. They never followed through. It went nowhere. A classical political Zionism urged Jews to establish a state in Palestine. There was another man who went under the name of Ahad Ha'am, one of the people. He was one of the 20th century's great thinkers, and he espoused something called cultural Zionism. Cultural Zionism simply means that it's not necessary to have a Jewish political state, but that you need a Jewish center which would influence positively Jewish life all over the world. It was like a hub of the wheel, and it would have linguistic, cultural, artistic, emotional, all kinds of influences on the world. Ultra-Orthodox Jews of the Hasidic persuasion held to the belief that only the Messiah could establish a Jewish homeland. And their political movement was called Agudat Yisrael, the Jewish Society. And so for human agents to preempt God's action and prerogatives was a travesty from their point of view. We might call this Messianic Judaism, and it was either opposed or neutral to the modern state of Israel. Finally, we ought to recognize that in America, during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, there was an organization called the American Council for Judaism, which actively opposed the establishment of the State of Israel. The American Council was actually founded in 1942, but there were forerunners of people who opposed Zionism. It represented an effort to decouple Jewish religion from Jewish nationality, and said we are Jews by religion, but we have no connection to Israel by national connection, and we are Americans by nationality. The reality of history, the creation of the State of Israel, vastly diminished the American Council, and today it is a very minor organization. A different approach, perhaps the dominant form of American Zionism since the 1940s, does not really expect most American Jews to move to Israel, but insists that, especially in the light of the Holocaust, when European Jews could not find any place of refuge, there must be at least one location in the world where a Jew can go as a matter of right and settle without challenge, find shelter and protection. All of these points were actively advocated in the U.S. during and after World War II. When Harry Truman became president in 1945, he authorized America to participate with Great Britain in discussions of the future of the Middle East region. The British wanted relief from the burden of their mandate over Palestine, and eventually the United Nations Special Commission on Palestine recommended that the area be partitioned, some of it be Jordanian, some of it be Israel, and that statehood would become a reality on May 14, 1948. From that time until today, with some notable exceptions, American Jews have been very staunch supporters of the State of Israel, and many have traveled there, and many have actually settled there, made Aliyah. Israel is today what Ahad Ha'am hoped, that is, it is a cultural and emotional center the Jews around the world.